Ruin My Childhood.
Hello, and welcome to Ruin My Childhood, the podcast where we decide if some things are better left in the past. I'm Kat.
I'm Mike.
And today we are going to be talking about Dante's Peak.
Whoa. Whoa.
All right, what do you remember about this movie?
I haven't seen it since I was a kid, so I don't really remember much of it. The only things that I can really remember vividly is the grandmother like jumping in the lake, and it's like acid, and she like pushes them to safety. And I remember the beginning of the movie for some reason. I vividly remember that there's like a woman who gets like hit in the head by like debris, and that's really all I remember. Pierce Brosnan's in it, and that's it. I couldn't tell you anything else.
I think the grandmother jumping into the lake and pushing the boat and burning in the acid is something that is etched into everyone's mind from their childhood.
Yeah, it's definitely something I remember. Those two things are the only things I really remember about this movie. The other thing that I remember is we got this movie on DVD when like Blockbuster or Hollywood Video were going like out of business, so we like bought a bunch of movies. And we wanted to watch a really bad movie, and we were going to watch this, and you ended up watching it without me. And it made me really sad.
Are you just getting things off your chest now?
Yeah, I'm just letting you know that I really wanted to watch this movie, and like I haven't watched it in like the 5 to 7 years.
Okay, so I distinctly remember I went and watched this with friends, and then we watched it together.
No, we haven't.
You have a
that was
selective
Twister.
memory.
We've watched Twister a couple times, but we did not watch this together because
Anyway,
I was mad at you.
Okay, aside from that swerve in conversation, this is not a kids' movie.
No.
Yet, I'm fairly certain that most families who had kids like between the ages of 8 and 15 when this came out watched this together.
I think it's one of those movies that at the time, I don't think the special effects are going to hold up, but at the time, the special effects were like amazing. So like this, Twister, Titanic, were movies that were just so spectacular that everyone had to see them.
There's a generation that wanted to watch the world burn.
Right. I think it's just one of these, like the 90s, mid 90s was that time where special effects, we could start doing these like crazy things that were only in our imagination before and had to be done. Like if you look at like the tornado in The Wizard of Oz, like it's pretty garbage. And like in my other podcast,
I've actually never seen The Wizard of Oz.
Really?
Not all the way through, no. I've seen bits and pieces.
That's crazy. But like we did Clash of the Titans on Remake Rewind. And, like, the special effects are garbage in that movie. So, like, going from the 80s to the 90s, like, there were some big things that happened. And it was kind of like a rebirth of cinema. Like, going to the movies mattered again. So, I get why people went and saw this movie.
I mean, on one hand, I do agree with that. On the other hand, I feel like CG has gotten so much better, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all effects have gotten better.
I agree. Like, there definitely is that balance that you need to have, and that's why a lot of people are really, really digging the new Star Wars movies, because they've gone back to the practical effects. Mad Max, back to practical effects. So there's got to be that marriage of the two, the two types of effects, and we're kind of getting back into the renaissance of doing both, which is nice. But yeah, that's my take on special effects.
Nice. So what I remember from this movie is, okay, so my dad has worked in emergency management for pretty much as long as FEMA was around. He
like
just
40
retired.
years.
He just retired after 38 years.
Jesus.
Yes, 38 years and 13 different zip codes working in emergency management. Congratulations, Dad. But yeah, I think that was part of the appeal of this movie when I was a kid, because my entire family just knew so much about emergency management,
smart
and natural
elitist.
disasters. I know. Pretty much, like, we would regularly have conversations about all the things that could go wrong, and things that were plausible in movies, and things that, oh, well, that definitely would not happen, and here's what would actually happen, which was usually actually way scarier. But yeah, we were like totally into the disaster movies growing up. Twister was like our go-to. We definitely watched Dante's Peak several times. So in a weird way, these movies do still have like warm, fuzzy memories for me.
That's weird.
All right, so let's go watch this.
Yeah, let's do it.
This Friday,
Did anybody feel that?
go with the flow. Dante's Peak will rock your socks off.
This is not good. This is not
A
good.
thrilling blockbuster adventure.
Stop!
with mind-blowing special effects.
Get out of there now before it's too late.
We do not think you have enough time.
Heart-pounding, run-for-your-life thrills. Come on! It will blow you away. Dante's Peak, rated PG-13.
Okay, we are back from watching Dante's Peak, and I have to say, I was really pleasantly surprised. I was kind of expecting this movie to be garbage.
I was expecting this movie to be garbage, and
I've seen this fairly recently.
I haven't seen this recently. I haven't seen this since I was a child, and I thought this was going to be garbage. That's why we bought the movie, like 7 years ago, thinking it was going to be a garbage movie. We just wanted to have a bad movie night.
Right.
The other thing that I'm surprised by is, this is going to sound terrible, but I remember the grandma scene in the lake being funny.
Oh.
And it was not funny this time.
No,
I felt
it was like really dark and
really
traumatic.
Uncomfortable, and I felt terrible for the children. And yeah, I remember thinking that scene was funny, and it's not funny. Maybe
not
as an
funny.
adult, I don't have a sixth sense of humor anymore. But
you know what's interesting too is I remember the grandma being a lot nicer than she actually was. This time around, like grandma was kind of a dick.
yeah, she was kind of mean. She was like, "It's my mountain."
Right? Like okay, the only reason they end up in like this situation and it gets as bad as it does for them is because they know grandma's not coming down off the mountain, so they have to go get grandma.
Well, they don't even do that. So I guess we should just summarize it real quick and then we'll get into it. So this one's pretty easy. It starts off, and I think it was in Colombia. There was like a volcano going around, and it's like really gnarly.
A volcano going around. Volcanoes are fairly stationary, Michael.
Well, no, they shake. They're moving around a lot.
Going around.
So there's a volcano
not a
erupting
tornado.
in Colombia, and Pierce Brosnan plays a man named Harry. He's a volcanologist trying to get him and his wife out. And I was right. There was like a rock or something comes through the truck and like caves in her skull, and he's like freaking out, and he's like crying. He's like, Marianne. And then it just
You were
jumps.
right about what?
At the beginning of the
Were we
episode,
ever not in agreement about that?
Oh no, I only remembered two things, and I was right that happened.
Good job.
So it just like jumps forward 4 years, and he's like doing some like push-ups and stuff, and he gets a phone call saying, "Go to Dante's Peak, Washington. We got like a weird read, and we think you should go check it out." So he shows up on the day of this like festival honoring the new mayor, played by Linda Hamilton. Her name's Rachel, and he's like, "Hey, I need to go check out this stuff." So she like takes them on this like tour and takes them up to the lake, and they find some weird readings, and he basically goes to the town like, "Hey, there's an issue. Like, we need to get you guys ready to evacuate." His boss shows up and was like, "No, slow your roll, bro." And then, of course, he ends up being right, and the volcano erupts, and then it's just a disaster from there on. And, there's a lot of little, like, crazy antics and there's some, like, little funny moments, and there's some, like, gruesome moments and some, like, really great action. And, yeah, overall, it was a great movie. I had fun with it, and let's talk about it.
All right. So, okay. Fairly early on in the movie, this volcanologist shows up at the town. He scoops up the mayor. They're going to go up to the mountains. First, they've got to drop the kids off at the grandma's house because she's like up on the mountain on their way.
Well, they have to go get the son from the mine first.
Right. The son's like chilling in a mine with his friends. Apparently, that's their hangout spot. So they get the son from the mine and they go and drop the kids off at the grandma's house. And the grandma's like, "Oh, you're going to like take some samples at the high lake? Well, how about I just come?" So she like invites herself and the kids and the freaking dog to go up to this lake.
Ruffy.
Oh, God, Ruffy. Anyway, don't even get me started on Ruffy. So they go up to this lake, and, they're taking samples of the water, and he's noticing that things are a little bit off. Then they go to this hot spring. And,
the hot spring's great.
Oh, so the boy's about to jump into the hot spring, and suddenly the fog on top of the hot spring spreads out of the way, and the little girl sees these two boiled bodies that are just floating there in the hot spring. You would think this is something that would scar these children for life.
And it never comes back up.
They never bring it up again. This is like a teeny tiny town up in the mountains. Two dead bodies surfaced in the hot spring that these people all frequent, that they all rely on for tourism to bring money into their downtown. And like nobody ever talks about it again.
Well, the scene's kind of funny. So like, they're gonna go swimming in the hot spring, right? and the little girl sees like clothing hanging on like a sign, and she's like, somebody forgot their clothes, and the grandma goes, sometimes people like to sneak up here for some nookie.
I know the grandma
Everything,
actually
right?
says nookie.
And then like the little girl says something about it smelling, and the boy says it smells, and she goes, it doesn't smell any worse than your room, let's go. And so the boy's like getting ready to like cannonball into a hot spring, which you don't normally jump into hot water. Just
Well, and
pointing
hot
that out.
springs usually aren't that deep.
Right.
Plus, like if you hit the bottom, like volcanic rock will really
It's hard.
scratch up your
Yeah.
shins.
So he's getting like ready to like cannonball in, and between like the smell and then like he just has this intuition. Harry is like, no, and he like runs and he goes to like catch him, and right as he goes to catch him, like there's a quick breeze and then it reveals the dead bodies. But he like catches this kid in midair,
And
which
they
was
show
pretty
quite
solid.
a bit of those bodies, like
Oh, they did.
full backside, like full
Like the skin boiled off of them and stuff.
Yeah, it's actually pretty graphic, all
They were
things
like
considered.
full on Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, it was pretty gnarly. I don't know how those kids don't end up with like PTSD, and
Well,
everyone's
worse stuff
just
happens
chill
to them
about
later.
it. That's true.
So
Yeah.
one of the things that I found really refreshing about this movie is, in so many other disaster movies, the guy from out of town will come in and be like, you guys got to get out of Dodge, and everyone's like, you're crazy, like we've got this event, like Jaws is a great example, like, oh, we can't close the beach, you know, the tourists are coming, and they want to do everything they can to avoid the problem, right? Well, in this one, like, they're ready to evacuate the town just at like that first time, like seeing the dead bodies in the springs, and then his boss shows up and was like, no, we've done this before, you need to slow your roll.
Here's what I don't like about that. So the beginning of the movie, this guy's working out or whatever, he's doing his push-ups. The boss calls him and he's like, I need you to go check this out. Like, he's the one who sent him out there.
Right.
Specifically, like, he was on vacation. He called him in from his vacation.
I don't think he was on vacation.
Yeah, he was on vacation.
Oh, okay. I didn't catch that, but okay,
Like,
I believe
he
you.
like made him cut his vacation short to go check this out because he thought there was a credible threat of an eruption. Something was off. So he sends this guy out and then immediately discounts absolutely everything that he tells him.
I agree and I disagree. So my big thing is he mentions that with similar readings, he evacuated a town like 10 years prior, and it ended up not being an issue. Like, it didn't blow up, it didn't have an eruption, there were no earthquakes. And then that town, because everyone left, basically the town died. Like, people stopped going there because everyone was afraid that their volcano was going to erupt, so their tourism died and the town went bankrupt. So I feel like he was being cautious. Like, I think he was doing
He was
the
being
right
cautious, but then like, so the guy keeps finding information that he thinks is significant. And each of these individual things, sure, they can be explained away, and there are different instances where the same things have happened and there's been no eruption. But it just seems like there are too many things all happening at the
Right.
same time for him to continue to be like, no, it's
thing
nothing.
Is, like, geology and even volcanology would be even newer. It's a fairly new science, so
Yeah.
there's no set rules for what's going to happen. So I feel like he was doing the right thing because he mentioned that he personally has bankrupted a town. And then
But they thought that this volcano was dormant. And if
Right.
there's enough venting that they were witnessing, if plants are starting to die, if squirrels were dying from,
right,
you know,
the squirrels, that's right.
right. So like there were enough things happening that do not happen with a dormant volcano.
Right. And I agree, but I don't think necessarily like the right move right then and there is, hey, evacuate the town right now. They didn't have enough information. So the guy agreed, like, hey, let's do the work. Let's test it and see what's going on. And the guy ends up staying for a week. He's like, we'll give you 2 days. And then they end up staying for like 10 days or something like that.
Yeah.
So, like, I think the guy was doing it. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, you're crazy, let's get out of here. Like, he put in the work. So I think he's just being more of a bureaucrat and a paper pusher and just trying to be overly cautious because he doesn't want to destroy a town. And I think it also kind of makes sense because they mention that this was the second best city to live in, but towards the end of the movie, they kind of tied this in at the end. Towards the end of the movie, right before they evacuated, Linda Hamilton's character Rachel says something along the lines like, you don't understand, this town was nearly bankrupt and it was really hard to get the businesses back. So I think there was probably like a deleted scene or something that like explained it, or maybe like a city council member was like, "Oh, I don't know about this," and then it snowballed from there. So maybe there was something that was left out that maybe explained why he was more cautious. But I kind of get it.
I mean, like, and that is something that I absolutely get. Like, just recently, actually, the other night, there was like a 7.9 earthquake in Alaska, and there was a tsunami warning for a large part of the West Coast, and there was a preliminary warning for the San Francisco Bay Area. I had a friend who, you know, like 3 or 4 hours later, was pissed that he had initially seen something on social media about the earthquake, but could not find any information. So he could not find any indication that there was a tsunami warning. Like, he was pissed. And from my perspective, I'm like, well, that's because there was never any, like, credible threat of a tsunami.
Right.
So calm down. Why are you mad that it wasn't worse? But from his perspective, he's like, we weren't given the chance to be prepared. So, like, I can kind of see how that works. And, you know, of course, I just am ridiculously familiar with emergency management. But for the sake of the film, I thought it was a little strange.
Yeah, I guess.
One thing I really do appreciate about this film, though, is, like you said, volcanology is pretty much like a newer offshoot of geology. It's building on top of a lot of that knowledge. And geology is, let's face it, it's mostly just rocks. And a lot of what goes into these jobs is just surveying and being out on mountains and placing sensors and looking at rocks, and it can be really dull,
totally,
and really boring. And they kind of show that a little bit in this movie, which I really appreciate. So they go out onto that ridge and they're placing that robot that they call like spider legs or something.
Spider legs, yeah.
And they actually removed the beacon that NASA had sent them to put on spider legs. It's like a transmitter that they're testing. So they take that off and they leave it in their base, I guess.
Yeah, their base camp.
Their base camp. And they go out on this ridge with spider legs, and they're trying to, you know, survey some stuff. So this guy, he's like, I think he's like the technician in charge of this robot.
Yeah.
He has to like,
bearded guy.
He has to boulder down the side of the ridge a little bit to get to it. And what's funny about this scene is like the music swells and they make this part of it super dramatic. Like, this is so dangerous. But in reality, like, that was some bouldering that honestly like a 5-year-old could have done, and the guy is attached to like 2 different lines.
Right.
He's
well, the thing is,
no imminent danger whatsoever until the earthquake hits. But it was really funny that like they made that part super dramatic.
Well, that scene's kind of crazy because there's a little earthquake and he falls and he went off tether, and then the earthquake happens, so he like ends up like breaking his leg because some rocks fall. And so Harry goes like, we need the helicopter right now. They got helicoptered in, right? And so they're like waiting for the helicopter to come, and the helicopter pilot renegotiates their contract in an emergency situation with this guy with a broken leg, which is super messed up. And in reality, it's like he was gonna have to come back anyway, and the only real
like
difference...
you don't charter a helicopter one way,
right?
You don't like say, hey, can you take these guys out to a ridge and leave them there? It's
exactly.
Like, can you take these guys out to a ridge, give them a couple hours, and then bring them back? It's not like you're calling a cab.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, it's like, in reality, like, I can get it where it's like, there was just a big earthquake, there could be aftershocks, I don't want to set the bird down, kind of thing. But he just hovered like 100 feet in the air and dropped a tether down. Like, he wasn't
I'm pretty
really
sure that's
endangered.
just extortion at that point. It's
exactly.
like a felony.
Yeah, so that was messed up.
Guy's a jerk.
Right, so then at this point, you know, they have, they take their readings and everything like that. And throughout this time, like, Harry's going out to dinner with Rachel, and he's getting to know the kids a little bit and shows them, like, some magic tricks. And, like, what I liked about this movie is that it did show a little bit of the way the town works and everything like that.
Absolutely.
But the pacing was still really good. Like, there was no lag in this movie.
Right. Like, I don't remember this being such a solid movie. And like you said, the town, you really start to feel invested in the town. You get a little bit of background. You get to know the characters. It's not like the protagonist, in this case, Harry, is some like epic hotshot and the movie's all about him and you don't really care. Because let me just throw this example out, like Die Hard. Die Hard, you're invested in the main character and his wife, and all the other people are kind of just like secondary. Like they pick them off one by one. You're like, oh, that sucks, but you're not super invested.
What about the
in
cop in Die Hard?
No, I mean, like they spend some time on the cop, but you know what I'm saying? Like there's like the hotshot star,
Right?
and everything else is just kind of like background noise.
Like
With
San
this-
Andreas with The Rock. Like the movie's just about him
we don't
saving
speak
his
about
family.
that movie.
Yeah, it's awful.
You didn't have to work 16 hours on that.
I agree. I didn't have to work.
Anyway, freaking movie. So I felt like really invested in the town, and it actually legitimately looked like all these little mountain towns that are up in the Cascade. It looked like Nevada City to me.
It also kind of looks like that town in Portland where we went and got those beads for you and everything. That little town.
Oh yeah, Manitou's.
Yeah,
no,
it's
is
just
it-
like a cute little town.
what's it called? Multnomah Village.
Yeah, that place.
It's like Manitou Springs, Colorado, Multnomah Village. It's got that little bit of charm, but I really appreciate that you get to know the secondary characters a little bit more. You get to see the town. There are actually these like beautiful sweeping shots of the mountain and the town itself, and I really like that. It's not just, oh, that's, on the WB backlot.
Right. So like the movie at this point like moves really quick. So he goes on this like date with Rachel, and he ends up going back to her place, and she's trying to make an excuse for him to stay by like making coffee, and they have this like little exchange where it's like, I'm gonna make coffee. He's like, no, don't. I'm gonna make coffee. No, I don't. And Funny's like, I really don't like your coffee. Like, let's just like, he's like, let's just get to it. Like, we know what we're here for.
And I liked that they were both like really open about how nervous they were, that like neither of them had a good bang in a really long time.
Right.
Like,
And then
it
the
wasn't like
daughter.
it wasn't like he swooped in and he was like smooth and sexy and like knew what he was doing,
No, they were
kinda,
both
like,
awkward.
they were kind of like fumbling through it.
Yeah, it was kind of sweet.
Yeah.
And then the daughter was like, Mom, I'm thirsty.
Mom's
then-
thirsty too.
Go. So they end up getting the girl water, and then they open up the faucet, or they turn on like, yeah, I guess opening the faucet's correct. And there's like all this brown water coming out, and then he goes to like the underground reservoir, and it's super sulfuric and it smells awful. So that's what really sets the rest of the movie in motion. They go to the boss, and the boss is like, yep, this is definitely going to erupt like any day now. So they call like an emergency meeting the next day. And during the emergency meeting with the entire town, like an earthquake just happens, like a giant one.
Yeah.
And this part is fantastic. Like this movie, they didn't spend a lot of money on digital effects. Like the digital effects were the clouds and the volcano itself.
And those still look great.
And they did look really good. But the buildings and stuff were miniatures, so they actually had like water hitting the miniatures and stuff like that, and they shook the miniatures, and everything fell, and it looked real, and it was fantastic. Like I was blown away by how good the collapsing buildings looked and all that stuff. Like it was really, really good. Like I can't really express how awesome it looks. Like I was like, oh my god, this town like is just gone.
Well, and I feel like in those big destructive scenes, when they CG it, there's something about the way things
The
move
physics.
that like the human brain just knows what's real and what's not. So even though it's a model and obviously it's scaled down, like when you see it, it's captivating because it's real. It's something that doesn't quite translate to CG for whatever reason.
Yeah, the problem with like CG stuff is I feel like they haven't quite got the physics right, and just like it always looks a little bit off.
Right.
Even on like Transformers movies where they'll crank $250 million into the movie, it still looks slightly off. Even though it's photorealistic, it's just something not quite right.
And I mean, like, the budget of this movie, it was probably nothing to sneeze at. Like, they got Pierce Brosnan when he was like 007. They got him at his peak.
Dante's peak.
So,
oh, come on, that was good.
That was horrible. So clearly they had to have a really good budget for this film, and it holds up in that way. So they did a great job.
It absolutely does. I agree. Should we just kind of like go through it really quick the rest of the movie. Like, there's some pretty good stuff that happens, and I really
I do want to
to
throw out there that, you know, they made up the difference in budget by casting Discount Joseph
JGL.
Gordon-Levitt. Right?
Yeah, that kid did look a lot like a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
There was like a good 30 seconds when I was like staring hard at him. Like,
I thought it was him initially.
Miss this? Was that him in that movie? But no, it wasn't.
I thought it was him too, like the first scene you saw him in. So like the earthquake happens and like it immediately just goes to like hell. Like everybody's panicking.
Dude,
like
everyone completely
people are crashing
panics
right away.
Yeah, like the first 20 seconds, people are already crashing cars.
Well, what's crazy is so like this guy's the expert, and so people start kind of like following him. So they go get the kids, right?
Yeah.
And they get there, and they have a note like they went to go get the grandmother because they called the grandmother like 10 times and she refused to come down the mountain.
Right, like
So
that is so screwed up.
Right.
You
And
have
so
to know that people are gonna go get you.
Right. So the kids decide to go up there. So like they steal the mom's car and start driving up the mountain. So at one point, Harry and Rachel need to drive across a river, and they have like a big like Humvee with like the snorkel. And so they start driving across, and
Right, so his engine's fine.
oh yeah, and Harry's like, "Oh, don't worry, we're fine." And then he looks back, and there's like a bunch of cars following him into the river, and he's like, "Idiots!"
They're following you, the
Right.
freaking expert. You're such a
And so-
jerk.
And he's lucky that somebody did follow him, because there's a point where he's trying to get across the river, and he's not quite touching the bottom anymore. He's losing traction, and so one of these cars just loses control because one, it's a little car, it's gonna
slowly
get
floats
washed away.
into them.
and it runs into them, so it gives them just enough oomph to get the traction and get going again.
And then they like leave them for dead.
They go and float away.
They're not like, hey, let's hold off a second and help
Like,
these
let
people
them
get
jump
into
onto the
our
back of the truck. Yeah, they just let these guys go.
What a jerk.
And so they're like there's a few things that happen that are pretty crazy. So
Okay, so the kid can drive the truck, but he can't work the wipers?
he can't work the wipers. No.
What?
And
It's also
so
like a stick. He's driving a stick shift, but
yeah,
he
he
can't
knows how to
work
drive
the
a
wipers.
stick, and he can't figure out wiper. I can't even drive a stick. So they're driving up the mountain, right? And then meanwhile in the town, like it keeps going back and forth to things going on in the town, and the same jerk helicopter pilot is like charging people like $15,000 cash. Like, who carries $15,000 cash?
Right, yeah, I was wondering
that-
that same thing.
Right. So $15,000 cash, and like the boss of like the
So you can fly
geologist
them
is like,
out in zero visibility?
right, don't do it, you're gonna crash. And the guy like does it anyway. And so not only do they crash, they almost crash into Pierce Brosnan and Linda Hamilton. Like,
It was
just
very
conveniently.
convenient. Yeah,
Um,
like this is the point where the movie just kind of gets ridiculous.
Yeah. So then they
It's
go
still
up.
very entertaining.
It's
but
still
it's
really
ridiculous.
entertaining. But they go up to the grandma's house, and they're like, "Come on, Grandma, let's go." And Linda Hamilton's like, "Let's go." And she's like, "No, I'm gonna die on my mountain if I'm gonna die."
And then a lava flow comes through the living room wall.
Comes through the living room wall, but like Linda Hamilton, like as Rachel's like, "Fine, let's go, kids." Like she's made her decision, let's go. And then, like you said, lava just comes flying through the wall. The
Screw
dog
Grandma.
just runs away, and they're like, "Ruffy," and they're like, "Let it go. It's a dog.
Screw
You guys are
Ruffy.
idiots." And so they jump. This is the infamous scene. They jump in this like little like dinghy, little metal boat with a little prop engine on it, and they start going across the water. And apparently it's acidic now. Like at the beginning of the movie, it was like a 3.7 on the pH scale, which is about as acidic as like a can of Coke.
Mm.
And by this point, it's like full on like sulfuric acid can eat through a boat. So they get about halfway across the lake when the engine stops working, and it starts kind of bubbling through the seams of the boat. And he wraps the shirt around his hand and starts paddling, right? So he gets like 3 or 4 paddles, and then he like flings it off. I don't know if that would work.
Right. So he's using his
Shirt.
covered hand as a paddle, which I mean, like theoretically that could be fine for a minute or two, but he's obviously splashing this water all over himself, all over the inside of the boat. And
the thing is, it's cloth, so you put it in one time and it's going to be
Right.
soaked.
It's going to be
And it's-
saturated.
Yeah, there's no way. So you can maybe get one time, but he does it like 4 or 5 times, and then he stops. And then the grandma jumps in. And, like, she's a hero. Like, don't get me wrong. She's awesome. Like, she saves them at this point. But the only reason they're in this situation is because she was too stubborn to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So, kudos for her for saving the family, but, like, she's the one who put them in danger. So, but she jumps in and she drags them and gets there. And then she, like, stumbles onto the like, I guess the beach. And they, like, show her legs, and they're, like, completely, like, the skin's gone. Like, you're just seeing, like, the fat and muscle layers. Like, it's gnarly.
I mean, like, there's just no way. I mean, like, okay, so, obviously, with volcanic activity, if it's venting through a lake, of course, it can make that lake more acidic. There was, where was that? There was actually, like, a pretty significant natural disaster where... like there was volcanic activity, and it dropped the pH of this lake to, like, I don't know, it must have been like somewhere around a 5. I think like it ranged from like 7 something to 3 something, which
5's really not that bad.
Well, I mean, like a 3 something would be somewhere in the range of like vinegar or
soda, like
a citrus juice or something like that. So that is pretty significant. But I don't, and like that was a really significant, that was a freak event in terms of science when that happened in real life. So for that to be the extreme, I highly doubt that a lake would ever be able to become so acidic that it could eat through a metal boat that quickly. Right.
I was willing to suspend my disbelief a little bit because it's been like 11 days since they took the reading.
Right, but like when that thing happened in real life, the natural disaster was more from like the fog that kind of gathered on top of the lake, and then the fog sort of descended down a mountain into a valley and killed everyone. And that's I kind of feel like if they were on this lake, it would be far more likely that they'd be choking and coughing and their eyes would be burning rather than having to deal with the threat of the acid actually touching them from the water, you know?
Right. And the thing that bothered me more than any of the other things, speaking as somebody who's had asthma, they never once cover their faces or their mouths or anything during this.
Because they're not weak like us.
Right. Well, no, I don't care who you are. With that much ash, like literally, even before the volcano actually erupted, the entire town was covered in ash.
Right.
And nobody like covered themselves or anything. So just to kind of like wrap up the rest of this movie, there's a few things that I kind of want to touch on, but to finish the rest of the movie, they end up like getting in a truck and like going through like a lava bed, and like the dog shows back up and they like drive closer to the dog so the dog can jump in. So they save the dog, which is crazy. And then the volcano actually starts to erupt. So they like drive through the mine, and the mine caves in on them a little bit. So they're stuck in the mine. And ultimately,
side note, I just remembered that thing with like the real life volcanic lake. I think that was in Russia.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Leave it to the Russians.
Stuff happens in Russia.
Anyway, carry on.
So they crash into the mine, and like the son is like, you know what? It's fine. Like I've got food and sodas and stuff, so we can like survive in here for a little bit. And so they're like, like the little girl's panicking. So Pierce Brosnan walks up to her and he goes, "Hey, have you ever been deep sea fishing?" And I'm thinking there's going to be like a story that he's like experienced, and there's going to be like an allegory or something.
Right.
And she goes, "No." And he goes, "Neither have I. When we get out of this, let's go to Florida and we'll get in a boat and we're going to go fishing." And my first thing was, the last excursion on a boat, their grandmother died.
What kind of a monster are you?
Right? I don't want to go on a boat. Grandma died on a boat.
I know.
And so it's like, that's a weird thing to like want to do. Like,
I mean, like any experience with a large body of water, you'd think these kids would kind of shy away from at this point.
Right. So that's a little weird. So then he realizes like, oh, I've got that NASA transmitter in the car. So he goes back to get the car, like go in the car and like get it going, and immediately there's a cave in, so he gets separated.
Right, it was like perfect timing.
Perfect timing. And then he gets like a compound fracture. And then he's still able to like activate the beacon, and he's like trapped in the car.
He gets a compound fracture, but he is clearly in more pain than the grandmother was when she had her legs burned off.
They were burned off.
They were like completely skinned.
Yeah, it's gnarly. But where this movie gets a little weird at this point is it just fades to black.
This is where it gets a little weird.
It shows like a couple other things. Like it shows like the rest of the scientist group getting out of the town, and like the leader dies because the bridge collapses. And it is what it is. That's what happens. But it like fades to black, and it's like 2 days later, and like the scientists are working, and the guy who broke his leg earlier like walks up to like a different scientist, and he's like, "Hey, what's that blinking red light? How long has it been going?" The guy's like, "It's been going for like 2 days."
Right.
And the guy's like, "That's the NASA beacon."
But see,
like,
we don't really know if he's just like guessing, because he says, I think it's been like 2 days, but then you don't actually get a frame of reference for when the cave-in happened and when this next scene is happening, because
well,
they don't
the thing
actually
is,
say there's
right,
been any time
but
passed.
if he said it's been he's like a day or two, so it's been at least 24 hours that
Right.
this thing has been blinking that he doesn't tell anybody about. So like at that point, like these guys could have been dead. Like they're like he really could have died with having a compound fracture. He could have bled out because he had no way of making a tourniquet or putting any pressure on it because he was pinned in that car.
Right, like if it had been 2 days, he's losing that leg.
Arm.
I thought it was his
It was
leg.
his arm.
Pretty sure it was his leg.
No, it was his arm. Because they showed him like afterwards when he's walking around. After they rescue him, he's walking around. And he's got his arm in a cast.
Really?
Yeah, it was his arm. I'll bet you $1,000.
You don't have $1,000.
Doesn't matter. It would be both of our money anyway. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of how the movie ends, and like it's all happy and everybody's safe, and like not that many people died. Like they didn't say an exact number, but they did go back through like the National Guard just before it erupted, and they checked every building. There wasn't anybody left in the town alive, so they got most of the town out, and it was for all intents and purposes, it was a pretty successful evacuation.
I mean, like, aside from the massive bureaucratic F up that left them on the mountain during the eruption, despite numerous warning signs that they should evacuate, yeah, it went great.
Yeah, but it's fine. So, like, overall impressions, what did you think?
I'm leading this discussion, Michael. I'm the leader.
I knew you were going to go there.
I'll ask how the movie was.
It's an Aristocats.
No, I was actually really pleasantly surprised, which is interesting because it has not been more than like 3 years since I've seen this movie, and I remember it being campy AF last time I watched it. And this time, like, it's solid. It has good pacing. The special effects still look great. The writing is, it's pretty good. It does
There's
delve
some decent
in
character development.
It gets a little bit absurd in certain parts, like when they're driving out and this volcanologist sees that the road is covered with black lava. Like, he knows that lava will catch his car on fire,
Yeah, but they
and
didn't
yet
have any other choice because there was
he
lava behind them too.
still drives through, and then Ruffy appears out of nowhere.
Right,
Like-
like surrounded by lava.
That's pretty absurd.
Yeah,
But I can still excuse those things, and overall it was still a solid, enjoyable, entertaining movie with great pacing that I did not once kind of like sit back and say, okay, is this almost over?
No, I was engaged the entire movie. I too was surprised. Like, I bought this movie years ago thinking it was just going to be, a god awful movie, but
Yeah.
I actually kind of liked it better than Twister.
How dare you?
I think it was a more solid movie. I think the character, like, don't get me wrong, Twister's a fun movie, and like a lot of the side characters
We have cows.
were, yeah, the side characters in Twister I thought were more likable than the main characters. Like, I didn't like the main characters in Twister, but I liked the main characters in this one and the side characters. Like, I thought this was just overall a more enjoyable movie, and I thought the special effects were fantastic.
That said, definitely not a kid's movie. What was everyone thinking?
No, it's pretty traumatic. Like, those kids are going to be messed up.
But, like a lot of family movies back in the day did have some pretty dark aspects.
This wasn't
So
a family movie.
I'd say this
Let's be
kind of
real.
like fits in with that.
I guess.
All right. What are we watching next time?
Do-do-do-do-do. We're gonna watch Austin Powers. Another movie that's really wasn't a kid movie, but we all saw anyway.
Absolutely not. Oh, jeez.
So yeah, Austin Powers. We're gonna do that. And Katrina, where can our listeners find you?
I'm all over the internet at Katrinaosity. Check out my YouTube channel.
And anything MDXpods related, you can go to MDXpods.com. You can also check us out on Twitter and Instagram for, regular updates, teasers, and stuff like that. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/MDXpods and throw $1 or $2 our way. Helps us fund the show and all that stuff. We have some pretty great rewards, so check it out. And overall, just thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye. Ciao.